My name is Maya Elena Gillingham Scott Chung. I'm 51 years old. Today's date is Saturday, February 4th, 2017. We're here in Los Angeles at the U.S. Professional Association for Transgender Health, or USPath. And I am here with two new colleagues and friends who are long-standing members of WPATH.
Thank you, Maya. My name is Lynn Fraser. I'm 70 years old, which I actually celebrated with Walter in Amsterdam last summer, my 70th birthday. And I'm at the inaugural US Path Scientific Conference at UCLA, February 4th. And my relationship to Dr. Bochting is very, very, very different. For how many years? Over 25?
Since 1989.
1989. Yeah, long time.
My name is Walter Bochting. I am 53 years old. And we are indeed here in Los Angeles in February of 2017 at the US PATH conference. And I consider Lynn a family member.
It's really true.
I'm very honored to get to know you both more here, and I would love to hear more from both of you about your origins, where you were born, a little bit about your cultures and your families of origins, and what, from the place of where you come from, what led you into this work.
So I was born in New York, but moved to the United Kingdom when I was 6 months old. One of the things that has really been important in my life and has brought me to this field is I've traveled all over the world my entire life, and so have seen many cultures, learned several languages. And when I moved to the UK, for example, I was in the newspaper as the youngest passenger who'd ever flown commercially overseas. And that just started a process of curiosity, I believe, about the world and its peoples. As a child, I lived in South America, in Brazil. And my parents were Southern, though, very liberal, but came from a Southern tradition. So I've been very used to living what we call in therapy the tension of the opposites. And when I went into graduate school, when I saw my first trans woman, my first trans client, I was really interested in her life. I came from a feminist tradition, but at the time I was in graduate school, I was putting myself through graduate school by being an international flight attendant. And I remember she talked about gender in such a way that it made sense to me from the perspective of my own life, even though I'm not trans. And she just started referring everyone she knew to me, and it has never stopped. And that was in 1972. So those are my origins.
I was born in a small village in the Netherlands close to the German border. And I grew up as a gender non-conforming child. So when my mom was walking around with me, they would say, "Oh, what a beautiful girl." But, I was a boy. And the story is that my mom actually talked to the family doctor when I was 4 years old. And my mom has a younger gay brother. And she saw in me, her brother. And she went to the family doctor and discussed that with him. and asked him whether perhaps a shot of testosterone might be helpful for me. And and the doctor said, no, that is not going to be helpful. I don't think that's needed. You just need to accept your son as he is, your child as he is. And so I grew up in a very supportive family environment in that regard. But I think in school, this was difficult and I was teased. And I think that is a big part of why I ended up working in this field.
I love to hear these stories, and I'll bring myself into it. I was born in 1966 in New York City. I had a butch lesbian great aunt who was the nurse in the hospital that I was born in. So I say sometimes that I was caught by the queer community in my family. I come from a Scottish-Irish family and have experienced initially a nuclear family, relatively middle class in New York City, and then moved into a divorced family that moved into a commune in the 70s in rural Massachusetts. And I think I knew I was queer since I was about 5, when I started kissing girls. And my passion for story and listening really comes culturally out of both branches of my family. My mom's a folk singer and poet and really carried Celtic and folk traditions through music and through poetry in her work. And my dad was an oral historian as well and did a lot of, I sort of grew up wanting to be Studs Terkel. Well, there you go. And I come to this work, I'm a queer, gender nonconforming mama with a trans masculine partner and a cis gay male donor, and I have a 12-year-old daughter. So a lot of my work around trans and queer communities comes around family building and reproductive justice, and also holding the complexity of, I love you talk about the tension of the opposites. I feel like I am very comfortable in the space in between, which I think is some of the beauty and the offering that our communities really bring to transformation. I love that we're here in the transformation room. And so I'd love to hear how the two of you met and what you remember from those first sparks together.
Well, I'll never forget it. We were at a conference in Cleveland. It was at the time, this organization was called the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association. And I don't what year was Cleveland, Walter? 1989. That's right, you had said that. So in 1989, we were, how at a conference you talk to people out in the lobby after a program of some sort, and I don't know how we wound up talking, but Walter and I started talking, and he was one of the most intelligent, thoughtful people I'd ever met in the field. And we started a conversation, and we haven't stopped. We have talked since 1989 about not only gender, of course, but about many, many, many things. But we've traveled all over the world together, at conferences. But I'm trying to think, what was it about you, Walter, that, do you remember what we were talking about? I just remember that conversation. We were laughing. We've also we laugh a lot. Go ahead.
Well, I recognize a gay man in a woman's body when I see one. And I think actually at that meeting I had done a presentation about what at that time people thought didn't exist, of transgender men with a gay and bisexual identity. And I was interested in the experience of that group because it taught us a lot about the relationship between gender identity and sexual orientation. And one way in which we were trying to illustrate that in some ways tells us a lot about gender and sexuality for all of us is to play with that, if you will, and to think about for everyone, cisgender or transgender, what is your gender identity? What in terms of your sexual orientation, what is in there in terms of your identity. So I think that was my big coming out during that meeting where I gave this presentation and took on some senior investigators in the field. Looking back at it, I feel I kind of had a chip on my shoulder, but it was a very interesting meeting. It was also the meeting where where the first time a video portrait was shown of Lou Sullivan, who of course embodied a gay transgender man who really worked so hard to be recognized as such and really was a trailblazer for transgender gay and bisexual men. But what I remember, I indeed remember us connecting in the lobby. And I would say we started laughing and we have been laughing ever since.
Well, to just segue into Lou Sullivan, because I think Lou Sullivan has been a very important person in the history of of our understanding, as you say, of gender identity and sexual orientation, as well as community. And there are archives about Lou, so what I'm saying is not privileged because it's in the history. But Lou taught me a lot. I knew Lou very well personally. I worked with Lou. And what both Walter and I, and one of the things that was so good for me in having Walter as a friend is back then there was very little evidence base. And we both kind of served as sounding boards talking to each other about what we saw that might not fit what limited information there was in the literature. And Lou, as a gay man, a trans gay man, had difficulty getting medical care because he did not fit what the idea that if you were a trans man or a transsexual, as we said back then, had to be straight to be able to access services. And Lou was my client, and I could tell that, Lou told me he was gay, and there was no reason from my perspective that he shouldn't be able to access medical interventions. And I was fortunate to be able to talk to Walter, who could confirm what I saw right in front of me anyway. But there's something about this field way back then. We had to, and people in this field, I believe, in general, and why I'm so comfortable here is people are pioneering spirits. And Walter certainly is. And what Walter did back then with Lou came to San Francisco and actually wrote a paper to get this in the evidence base out and published. And I, as the clinician, was able to make the referrals and find doctors who were willing to provide services to Lou. So that was part of our connection, that even though you were in Minnesota and I was in San Francisco, we both believed in listening to the people we worked with and speaking up. Because back then, it's so different now, but back then, trans people did not have voices like they have now. Unfortunately, but that's the reality. And I even remember you and I having this long conversation. This is fast forward, but Walter and I always have taken walks until I've gotten a little bit older and can't walk 10 miles. But we used to. And you told me, I don't know how many years ago, that you envisioned a day. You envisioned a day when trans people were going to be central in terms of professionalism. Trans people were going to be the voices of the profession. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And I couldn't even imagine that that could happen. You had the imagination and the vision. And then, of course, and you were always right. Yeah, that's how I saw you, that you had the capacity. And I think that's a really important aspect of working in this field, is to have imagination. But that was, I mean, I look here at US Path and I look at how many trans providers there are now and what it was like when we started. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think not only as trans professionals, but I think as transgender people. Because I had a friend when I moved to Amsterdam from this little village, who was transgender, who really went then through transition, and I went through that with her as a friend. But then after that, really ran into some difficulties. And I really learned a lot from her story because, you know, making a change and living the rest of her life as a woman kind of doesn't do justice, I think, to her experience. And I think when I came to Minnesota then in the late 1980s and started to see clients and have conversations with you and go to San Francisco and interview Lou and connect with the community, I think I realized that that was very important, that really there had to be a creation more of a transgender space with people with their own specific and unique experiences and needs. And then I saw in my work, as I joined the faculty of a program in Minnesota that was founded in the 1960s, that program really needed to open up to a generation of transgender people becoming more vocal about their unique experience and breaking out of this idea of the gender binary. And I think that really extended into WPATH. And just when I thought we had won that battle, do we have this advent of early medical intervention. And I feel in some ways it's very dual now. We're back at that point. Well, if we start changing sex early enough, maybe we can do it and fit in the binary. But at the same time, of course, there is a whole generation of people who are now identifying as genderqueer and as different. So I think it goes along with the theme. I think maybe that we connect on, that we are very interested in experiences and people who have an experience that is outside of the norm, and you know what we can learn from that. And I think it's because I've always been outside of the norm, albeit not in that same way, but I can relate. I can relate.
So can I. So can I. And for me, I can remember going back to high school. And I always wanted to connect to people who were, again, outside the space that I looked like on the outside. Because on the outside, and I present as rather conventional, straight. In high school, I was a cheerleader, and my boyfriend was the football captain. He was a football captain. But my best friends were two gay guys, artists. And I always enjoyed, there was just something about that, well, back then they weren't out, but they were very, very, they were very feminine and very fun. And so I always had those two worlds. But I felt at home. Where did I feel at home? With them. And where do I feel at home? I don't know. And so you said I'm a gay man in a, what am I again?
A gay man trapped in a woman's body.
Yeah, yeah. And
Maybe not so trapped anymore.
but when I came to, this was before I met Walter. I went to my first Habigda conference in 1979, and I just felt at home. And in terms of what Walter and I have experienced in WPATH is we're both past presidents of WPATH. And we have been very immersed in the WPATH culture for many years and have watched it grow and change and have been stewards of the WPATH culture and have passed it on. And I remember we had a long conversation on another one of our walks where you were president-elect, I believe, at the time, and asking if I might be interested in taking on more of a leadership role. Do you remember that? Walter's been my mentor. I mean, I think we've been mentored each other over the years in different ways because I'm older, and like a family member, I just spent, I'm going all over the place, but last summer for my 70th birthday, we were in Amsterdam, and I went and visited his family and stayed with his family, his parents, and saw where he grew up as a child and met, cousins and uncles, and really got even more knowledge of his background. A wonderful family, by the way. But so I've been family that way, but he's mentored me professionally in terms of leadership within WPATH. So
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, what we both have in common is that we have a lot of clinical experience and many years witnessing, as you would say, transgender people and gender nonconforming lives and their families. And I think I realize that now that I'm more dedicated to research or spend more of my time on research, what a incredible knowledge base that is, and how much I've learned from that work. And you have that same knowledge base. So I think it was that I really wanted you to communicate that outward. And it's hard to find good leaders. So I thought, what a better successor than Lynn, if I can get her to agree to do it. But I think you founded the Global Education Initiative and the training that was so needed, and talk about disseminating that body of knowledge and experience that you have based on having been working with the community so close up and being led into their lives since the 70s. And still, you do a lot of clinical work. So that is something that, as I said, I still see clients one afternoon and evening a week. But I'm so appreciative of having had that experience or that privilege of working with people. And I do struggle actually with how to communicate that. And I think this meeting that we're in these couple of days is another example of that, when it's wonderful to see so many new people get into the field, but there is an enormous learning curve, I think. And I think that the Global Education Initiative is a venue to transmit that and disseminate that. And I think there was at one point a risk that WPATH would be in the margin and would no longer be relevant. And I think that we were both part of reversing that concern and really stepping up to what is our responsibility.
Walter, I wish you would talk about that period, because I don't know if people know how much impact, well, there are many ways you've had impact, but in terms of the impact of making WPATH relevant when it was not, it could have just disappeared. And then the other, that even though you have such strong clinical skills, what I think, aside from the leadership role within the organization, your research. You are one of the foremost, if not the foremost, researcher in trans health and have made major contributions in the field. This is a part of you that, I mean, I'm not a researcher. I just see clients. I know I work with trans people day in and day out for years and years and years, but I don't do research, and you do, and I think that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, I think that my research is very much informed by my clinical work. So some of the questions, because if you do good therapy, in my view, you walk away with more questions rather than answers, right? That's what it's all about. And I think that I'm pursuing these questions now in my research, and I think that has just become increasingly important. You know, in terms of healthcare, it's all about evidence-based care. And that means that in a very systematic way, in addition to clinical knowledge and clinical observation, that in a systematic way we study people's experiences and publish it in the literature so that people can learn from that and that can be used to push the field forward and with the ultimate goal of improving the quality of life of transgender people. So one of the things that I'm focusing on now is a study in New York, Atlanta, and San Francisco that really looks at transgender identity development across the lifespan. So not just about the transition period, and very much beyond the binary. And one of the things that we're finding now, that people who in their development come from a very genderqueer non-binary perspective, over the course of their life find their way, have to learn or are learning to navigate the binary and find their way. So it's almost like a movement from protesting that or in response to the stigma and not fitting in, and really queering out towards, over the course of lifetime, integrating that and then again reconnecting with how, you know, what they have in common with any human being. And I think the people who start in a very binary way, even the children now that get puberty suppression and may change their role in childhood or early adolescence, I think discover sooner or later that their experience is different from non-transgender boys and girls and men and women. So I see the people that initially identify more with the binary become less and less binary over the course of their lifetime. And so that's one of the things that I'm looking at now, along with what I shared about my friend. You know, that for her, really changing sex really didn't pan out very well. And I also lost contact with her for 20 years. And just last year, we reconnected, and you know, I'm so glad that she survived and that she made it through, and is now, she's an artist, so she's always had that, I think, as an outlet, is able to embrace this more. So I think that I oftentimes say that clinical work is the best qualitative research there is. So, but I'm now trying to also look at some of these questions in a quantitative way and look at, you know, transgender person's experience keeps evolving over the course of a person's lifetime. And it's not just about recognizing an incongruence and solving that and moving on, but as time goes on, people keep revisiting and redefining their, not only their gender identity, but their place in the world.
This is why I love talking to you. because what you're finding in your research makes sense. It makes sense. And one of the things that I find in talking to you, is I just start having lots of questions. And although this is an interview type of, it's not quite like taking our long walks. It feels a lot like it. And I'm starting to get excited about what you're doing. And one of the things that's going through my mind is you have research questions that are going to last your whole life. And where's this going to take you?
I don't know. I'm so in the midst of it. I think right now, at this point, I think in time, I think that I think we need to look at how the issues facing transgender people, how they connect with issues facing many other groups in society and other minority identities. And we just had the Women's March on Washington, and transgender people were very visible in that march. And it was a Women March Plus, or Women's Plus March, I think, because it was about women, but that stood for all kinds of people. And I think that we need to become, or we will become, more issue focused rather than identity focused. So I think that's back to the very beginning when I said a gay man in a women's body. It's really a way to put these things in perspective. Or another way, which is maybe dangerous to say or scare, sensitive issue to say, it's not to take ourselves that seriously. And of course it is important, but it's really about, that's another concept that you've taught me, an internal job. Is that it? An internal job. So it's really about living with yourself and with all the contradictions and questions that life brings. And I think the identity labels are a vehicle to do, a very important way for people to be able to communicate and assert their autonomy and identity and experience and communicate about that. But I feel that perhaps it's early, but that we've come to a time that that's the discourse is going to shift towards focusing on issues that we have in common with different partnerships, with different groups and constituencies, rather than come up with another term to, articulate our, beautiful, diverse experiences. So I do see a shift from identity politics, if you will, to becoming more issue focused and to cut more across to, and that fits, I think, with my tradition of also, on the one hand, being concerned and wanting to make a difference for transgender people, and on the other hand, really examine what transgender people are teaching us about the human condition. And so I think we are at this point now to take that a step further and build bridges across, the kind of agenda of issues that we have in common across all of those identities and minority statuses.
So where that takes me when I listen to this with you, a lot of things were going through my mind, but I had flashes about what's kind of going on culturally, that we as a culture must do this if we're going to have impact. I mean, and that has to do with what's going on politically and what we do need to unite. And then I started thinking about you as a little person in that little town in Holland or in the Netherlands, and your family. And what I saw, that you grew up in this little town, but you were surrounded by your parents are just so proud of you. I just remember how proud, and I saw your church and I saw your whole, I was just imagining you growing up and now talking about being gender nonconforming, but you had that base that gave you the capacity to think larger, and that's where you're even moving now, and some of your other research, I mean, you're really, I think, on the cusp of some things.
We've been on the cusp of some things for a very long time. And it's good to know and to affirm that we still are. But there are a lot more people. That's wonderful. We're not, we have enormous numbers of other people. So today, for example, I was so proud so from Minnesota, then I went to Columbia University to focus more on research. And I was so proud of the people that are carrying on the work in Minnesota, what they have come up with and what they are doing now. And they just presented a new model of more gender diverse perspectives in working with children and adolescents and their families to kind of provide a counterpoint to what for some people is life-saving, the early medical intervention, but which in essence is a very binary approach. So certainly that is part of what they offer, but what they do is broader. So it's just so great to see that they are carrying on that work. And yes, I am oftentimes thinking, what, again, this time in history, I did think, we have a project now that is focusing on transgender people's sexuality and sexual pleasure. And I thought, where does that fit within the issues that we need to be focusing on? I mean, if the whole planet goes off the cliff, well, you could say we might as well do it having fun, but no, so I think this is a point of reconsidering our priorities, and it is a continuation of the same work, but I think we need to recalibrate and look beyond our particular group.
I was going off with the having fun part. And it made me then think of family building. I don't know why, having fun, family building, and what your people are doing. I mean, we're doing more in the field. I'm going back to our field and not just, issues based. But it was our conversation a little bit earlier, and I don't know if you want to come into the...
Sure. Well, there's so much richness here, first of all. Thank you both. It's really a pleasure to witness the love between you. The family in there is very evident. There's a couple of things that I was thinking. I as a daughter of a poet, there was a couple lines of poetry that were coming to me. One is, I love Rilke's line of be patient with all that is unresolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves and live the questions, and sooner or later you'll live your way into the answers. And I really feel in both of you that place and the power of living in the question and creating community to explore those questions and evolve together into new questions, not into stagnant answers. So I'm really touched to see that evolution with both of you, and very much come from that place myself. And yeah, around the question of sex and pleasure, which is deep in my heart, as someone who's a parent, who's partnered with a trans person, and who's a reproductive justice organizer. We're actually doing an event that's kicking off the birth of Sprout Family, which is a trans and queer-centered reproductive justice center. We're doing an event called What Sex Got to Do With It, which is around sex, pleasure, fertility, and family building within trans communities. So I do feel it's very, very core in our power and our healing to speak publicly about sex and pleasure. I think it's very important, especially trans and queer folks have been so clinicalized, and our family building processes and the idea that we could actually create life through pleasure and love and connection is actually so core as a human desire, and has been really denied a lot of trans and queer and gender nonconforming folk. And so I think bringing our bodies and the place that love and connection and pleasure has in the biological family building process is actually quite revolutionary and really, really important. So as we're in a time, one of my mentors said, where patients are, doctors are coming off their pedestals and patients are coming off their knees, when we're in this meeting place. Yeah, I feel that so strongly, and it's one of the things that I think that bringing your personal stories and hearing where you came from. I mean, I'll always think of the little boy in the Netherlands when I connect with you, and that's a powerful place to come from, that you're not just a researcher, not just, all of the titles you are, but that there was this place and this spark that started with you that has helped to evolve movements. So we're completing our time, and I wanted to thank you both and see if you wanted to thank each other or say anything as we close.
Yes, thank you both, and thank you for reaffirming the importance of pleasure as a force of life. And yes, I just, I do love you, Lynn, and I'm looking forward to many more years of our friendship and work and questioning and having fun while we're doing it.
I feel exactly the same way. And when you were talking, I was thinking about how you were always so interested in my child. And very few people of my friends in this world had the caring. I have a 31-year-old now, but Walter came to his soccer games from the age of 5, and he just can't keep. My son just got engaged in New York and was visiting Walter at the time with his fiance. And yeah, you've just been a part of my life in so many ways. And I also feel that I hope that continues for many, many, many years. Yeah, I love you too.
Okay.